Over the last few months, we've seen some changes to agents like Gekko, Harbor, and Reyna. It's also been a while since I've done a tier list video, so today we'll be taking a revised look at how strong every agent is for ranked right now in Valorant. We'll kick things off with the most recently updated agents, so that means first off we're going to be talking about Gekko. I think prior to his changes, I would have already considered Gekko balanced, maybe a little bit on the weaker side, but considering his identity as being a relatively beginner-friendly sort of initiator, I think it made sense for him to have a slightly lower skill ceiling, and he wasn't really in need of any crazy buffs. I mean, that's just always how he's been in game. He's a pretty easy initiator to pick up and play, he plants the spike for you, you don't have to worry about blinding teammates, and while Mosh was definitely his weakest ability, I never would have called it bad. The extended duration on picking up his little globules isn't too impactful of a change, but I do think being able to pick up Mosh is crazy, at least on attack. You can now consistently use this molly to clear out a cubby, and then pick it back up again to use for the post plant. All in all, I think Gekko is in a solid spot for ranked right now. Maybe in the higher ranks you'd want to pick another agent you can simply do more with, but I'm happy putting him in the A tier overall. The main thing you have to remember when playing him is just keeping up the connection with your little buddies and picking them up for multiple uses. Speaking of connection, one of the most frustrating things in any online game is dying due to high ping or packer loss. That's especially true in a game like Valorant, where even a few milliseconds can be the difference between living or dying. Well, today's sponsor, EXITLAG, is designed specifically to solve that problem. EXITLAG is a performance optimization software that improves your connection to the game servers using technologies like AI route optimization and multipath connections. The AI automatically scans and selects the fastest routes available to the server you're playing on, while the multipath system sends your data through several routes at once to keep your connection stable. Getting started with EXITLAG is really simple. Just click the EXITLAG link in the description, create an account, and download the latest version of the client. Once the program is installed and open, you'll see the massive amount of games that EXITLAG supports. There are over 2,000 different titles worldwide, of course including Valorant. From there, you just select the game, choose the region you want to connect to, and hit apply routes. From there, EXITLAG automatically optimizes your connection and stabilizes your route to the server. You can try EXITLAG right now with their special offer of 50% off an annual subscription and even get an extra 3 months free. That's available for a limited time as part of their birthday promotions. So make sure to check it out using the link in the description or pinned comment, and thanks again to EXITLAG for sponsoring this video. Alright, next let's go over Reyna. It's been a little while since her changes, but I think it's fair to say that she's quite a divisive agent. I remember seeing people questioning why Riot were nerfing the alleged worst duelist in the game. I mean, she's never picked in pro play, so she can't be that good, right? Maybe in a more coordinated environment that's true, but in the chaotic world of ranked where it's every man for himself, Reyna thrives as a selfish agent, to the point where she was the most picked agent in the game. You wouldn't go a single ranked game without seeing a Reyna on at least one team, typically both. That's enough context though. Where does Reyna actually sit after these nerfs? The changes on paper didn't seem too severe, but her pick rate did take a noticeable fall, although it is still incredibly high. I think at her core she's just made for that snowbally playstyle and would need to see massive changes to not be as prominent in ranked. If you play Reyna, you definitely will feel that heal going away after 10 seconds, but if anything, this is probably just encouraging Reyna players to think more about when to use their heal and pushing them to fight more while the heal is active. With all that being said, I am going to leave Reyna towards the bottom of the B tier. Putting her any lower would imply she's either deserving of a buff or too hard for ranked, and neither of those are true. You can for sure get more value out of the other duelists and create more space for your team, but again, like I said, Reyna is still going to excel at snowballing rounds and taking fights. So for better or worse, Reyna's place in solo queue is probably going to remain for now. Now let's talk about Harbor. After his underwhelming rework, he's already received buffs in 2 separate patches. After all that, I finally think he's in a playable, albeit niche state. He's probably not a traditional enough controller to regularly be picked as a solo smoker. Agents like Clove, Omen, Brimstone, and even Astra are all probably better options in that regard, but there is seriously a lot more that Harbor can do now. Between the info gathering on Storm Surge, the control and extra uptime on his ultimate, and even just how frequently you can have Cove out, I think Harbor one tricks are eating good. His ultimate in particular is significantly better, now that you can stop it wherever you want and it actually stays up for a fairly long time. I mean, this may as well be an actual wall, because walking through this and getting nearsighted is a death sentence. It's going to be crazy good, especially on retakes, to block off main on any side. So I do genuinely think Harbor is at a point now where if he gets any more buffs, he'll be too good, So while he probably is still a little rough around the edges for ranked, unless you really know what you're doing, I don't think he's a complete troll pick anymore. I've still got him in C tier for ranked because I think he's a little hard to make work as the solo controller, but mark my words, if he gets another buff, it's going to be too much. Alright, so those are the latest agents that were changed. Now moving on to the other ones, and of course KO is right down the bottom. I haven't done a tier list video since the big patch 11.8 changes at the end of last year, so I'll also mention how some of those agents were affected by that where possible. With that in mind, KO wasn't actually hit too hard in that overhaul. Yeah, his knife is on a longer cooldown, but his right click flash got a significant buff, perfect for playing for yourself in ranked. Having said that, his core issues are still the same, and he fundamentally requires too much coordination to be anywhere above C tier for me. Suppression is never going to be that good in ranked where it's hard to keep your team organized and able to capitalize on that small time frame. So yeah, he's sort of similar to Harbor in a way. I used to have these guys all the way down in D tier where you should just never be playing them. Now I'd say KO is, again, more of a niche agent, requires too much team play for ranked. Moving on to Viper now, who is definitely glad that Breeze is in the map pool, and despite the changes on there, I do still think that Viper has her place, probably as the best controller on that map. Beyond Breeze though, I don't realistically know where you're going to be playing Viper. As per usual, she's going to struggle on any other map as a solo controller, and in ranked, it's of course going to be very rare to get two controllers on your team at once. Obviously, in pro play, when it's all about map control and denying space, Viper is insane, but again, in ranked, everyone is just running it down with very little respect for util, and you'll probably get caught out if you make any assumptions about your util actually blocking people out. The only change Viper got in 11.8 was the decay nerf, which wasn't too bad. 10 decay still leaves you at the breakpoint for the Outlaw or Phantom, and honestly, even though I still think she's weak overall, she probably comes out relatively unscathed and stronger from that patch compared to the other controllers. Still, I'm going to put Viper in the C tier. Like I said at the start, you rarely want her in ranked outside of Breeze. Next up is Breach, who did actually receive some very small buffs at the start of this year, but I still think he's in a pretty bad spot right now. Even before the changes to big area of effect abilities and the concuss standardization, I would argue that Breach was just weak because he provided very little information compared to all of the other initiators. It's all well and good to dump flashes and stuns and an aftershock on someone, but if you don't know where they are, then it's going to be hard to know where to use all that util. He definitely does have some merit if you're duoed with a duelist, you know, a Raze or a Neon or even a Waylay you can in theory set up really well. Outside of that though, it can be hard to time your util correctly with teammates, and in general right now I think Breach is in the worst state he's been in for quite some time, so I'm leaving him low in the C tier. Now, Astra is one of my favorite agents and I've got a bit of a soft spot for her, but objectively she is one of the hardest agents to play. The main reason for that just boils down to how much map awareness and game sense you need to get the most out of her abilities, but on top of that you also need a lot of coordination with your teammates, which you just won't normally find in solo queue. She also does just have a bit of a barrier to play compared to some of the other controllers as well, and when I say that I just mean she isn't as intuitive as, you know, your Cloves and your Brimstones. The main selling point for Astra is always going to be the global presence, so she is going to be great on bigger maps, and especially on Breeze after the recent changes, I do actually think she's a good pick there now. But yeah, ultimately in the right hands, I do think Astra can be good, but because of how hard she is to play not only on an individual level, but also in tandem with your teammates, I find her hard to recommend to anything below around Ascendant, and she's just hard for ranked, like I keep saying, so I'll leave her here in the C tier. That brings us to Veto now, who is still the newest agent in the game as of when I'm making this video, and I've never placed him on a tier list before. He actually still hasn't had any significant updates since he got added, and I think that's because he immediately landed in a pretty good spot. On paper, his abilities sound broken, you can destroy most utility in the game, and personally can't get blinded full stop in your ultimate. The only problem with all that though is that utility isn't the be all end all of Valorant. At the end of the day, you do just have to shoot them in the head. I honestly think that in ranked, Veto has a similar problem to KO and his suppression. Even though they aren't the exact same effect, they are both based around denying enemy utility. And like I alluded to with KO, I just don't think that core concept in ranked is that good. People are sloppy enough with their utility anyway that you can only have so much impact in taking that away from them. Veto's definitely still serviceable with his trips and teleport. He's a lot of fun to play, but ultimately, I think in ranked you'd rather opt for more information or stall rather than simply map coverage, and as far as teleports go, Chamber has more to offer with a selfish playstyle in the same slot. So yeah, with all that in mind, I'm going to leave him towards the top of the C tier. I don't think he should be buffed, but he's a little bit hard to get value out of in ranked. Next up is Waylay, who initially landed pretty underwhelmingly around a year ago, but she quickly received some buffs to bring her up to speed. Even the change in patch 11.8 I think is almost a net buff to her. You can see all those changes on screen there, and the majority of them were nerfs, but having only 1 second to dodge that ultimate is absolutely insane, assuming you use it in the right space. I think the problem with Waylay is that she feels very all or nothing with some of her kit. More often than not, you'll just dash in, use your saturate, and then teleport back to main. At that point, you're then stuck in main with no utility left to use. Saturate is pretty powerful, don't get me wrong. Honestly, all of her abilities are quite strong. I think another problem I have with her is that she's probably the least self-sufficient duelist in the game and benefits the most off team play to get the best out of her abilities. Still, Waylay is obviously very good in the pro scene at the moment, and people are even calling for a few nerfs, but in ranked on the other hand, I think she just requires too much coordination compared to some of the other duelists, so I'm going to leave her towards the top of the C tier. Finally, for this tier, we've got Cypher. Now, unlike all of the other agents down here, where I think they are just more so hard for ranked as opposed to actually being that weak, Cypher I do actually think is in need of a slight buff. I'm not in a hurry for him to get any changes, mind you. It feels like he was the best sentinel in the game for a very long time, but in patch 11.8, I think he was probably hit the hardest compared to all the other agents. He lost a significant amount of his identity with the nerfs, essentially removing kill trips entirely, but he even saw nerfs to his camera too, making it easier for enemies to detect. It felt like Cypher was already trending downwards as people began to opt for other sentinels like Chamber and Vyse, but this patch just sped up that process. Now all he's really going to be good for is information. And yeah, the trips are still useful for keeping space for yourself and your team, but he just lacks threat compared to a lot of the other sentinels right now, so I'm leaving Cypher down here in the C tier, again because I think he is weak. Those are all of my C tier agents this patch you can see there. Again, most of these are just agents that I think aren't great for ranked because they need more coordination than things like say Chamber or Clove or Reyna. In the past, I've put multiple agents in the D tier, but right now I don't think anyone is that bad, and other than Cypher and maybe Breach or Veto, I don't think any of these agents here need buffs. Moving on to the B tier now, and the first agent I have here other than Reyna is going to be Tejo. It's pretty interesting to me because he came out on launch absolutely busted with the refreshing missiles, then he saw some pretty huge but justified nerfs, and ever since then he's slowly been creeping up in both pick rate and win rate, without receiving any meaningful changes. He did have that patch towards the start of the year, but I honestly don't think they're that impactful. I mean, realistically, I'm sat here looking at these trying to even figure out if they're a buff or a nerf. I mean, he was hit by the concuss standardization changes like most agents, but then he also got a compensation buff on his stun, which isn't true for most characters. I actually think he's pretty easy to pilot once you get the hang of positioning his ultimate, and really the only thing with him is knowing the right time to use that ability and his missiles, so you can flush enemies out from behind cover and into your crosshair. I still think a few of the other initiators do a better job at overall initiating though, so I can't place him too high. I do still think he's in a fine spot and doesn't need any buffs as far as I'm concerned, so I'm leaving Tejo in the B tier. Next up is Deadlock, who I've been pretty high on in the past, and since then she did get that big buff where the wall and GravNet were swapped, making GravNet her signature ability on a cooldown. That cooldown of course got extended pretty recently, but I still think Deadlock is a lot better than people give her credit for. Having no flank watch is just a downside to her that you'll have to look past, and once you do get past that, you have the best lockdown sentinel in the game. In an environment where people are mindlessly running it down, that style of agent is always going to be good. Like I said, I used to be pretty high on Deadlock, always putting her more in like the A tier. I have come down on her a little bit since then, so even though she is just objectively stronger since last time, or the last time I made a tier list video, I'm still going to be putting her in the B tier today. She's not super strong, but I also don't think she needs any buffs or nerfs. Vyse is another agent that I find interesting because obviously she received some of the biggest nerfs in patch 11.8, but I think it's worth remembering what happened with her on release. The community perceived her as a little bit weak on launch, so she received a few minor buffs, but then as people gradually became better and better with her kit, she became one of the best, if not the best sentinels in the game without receiving any crazy changes. She got a minor nerf in patch 10.6, but when that wasn't enough, of course we got the much more severe nerfs that we're all aware of a few months ago. While those nerfs definitely were hefty, I don't think that they were that uncalled for. I think it was overkill for Vyse's flash to also give her information when she already has the wall in her kit. The one thing I will say now is that I think her ultimate feels terrible, but overall her kit and the other abilities do make up for it, and I think she is still pretty strong. I want to say she's a slightly worse lockdown sentinel than Deadlock, but I think she makes up for some of that by being more versatile and having some information on her wall. With that being said, I'm going to leave Vyse just above Deadlock in the B tier, but I wouldn't be surprised if she continues to creep up over time. Let's quickly talk about Brimstone now, who is probably one of the most consistent agents in the game because I can't remember the last time he saw any massive updates. He's obviously quite good on bind, and that's probably where you'll be playing him most, and then if Fracture does end up coming back, he would obviously benefit pretty massively from that as well. His general playstyle of just dropping all 3 smokes and just sending it can be pretty fitting for ranked, and then on top of that, his post-plant stall is always going to be good, but that is where I think the upsides end. His lack of range really hurts on the bigger maps, and there are quite a few of those in the map pool at the moment, and then as soon as any team starts playing a little bit slower and baiting out your smokes, you're going to be losing a lot of your value. To be honest, I just think he's a tier below the other dome controllers. Astra is better in higher ranks. Omen's just better overall, I think. He's got better range on his smokes and he can do more with his flash and his teleport. Then of course, Clove is just crazy for running it down. Apart from bind, you're almost always going to be better off going one of those 3 controllers, I think. But realistically, Brimstone isn't that bad, so I'll leave him in the B tier. Then finally for the B tier, we have ISO, who I was surprised to learn has seen a steady decline in both win and pick rate over the last year or so, despite hardly receiving any changes. All the way back in patch 10.4, he got these ones, which maybe for high level play was great, giving him access to suppression, but since we know that effect isn't that strong in ranked anyway, the trade-off of losing a charge of undercut and making it more expensive might have been too much of a downside for the more casual players. Then more recently, his ultimate losing a little bit of range isn't that big of a deal to me. Like maybe now you're a little bit less confident in clearing the side if you don't hit anyone, but I don't think those 12 meters are enough to miss an enemy if you already had a solid idea of where they are. I'd still say ISO is a decent pick in ranked and he's a lot of fun to play in snowball with a double tap ability, but overall you're probably going to see more value and create more space on most of the other duelists. So that wraps up my B tier of agents. Everyone here I think is in a decent place and doesn't particularly need any buffs, although they are typically outclassed by other agents in the same role. Kicking off our A tier now, and I've actually got Killjoy first. She used to be massively popular in both ranked and especially in pro play, then she got hammered down by some nerfs, and then she actually got off relatively light in patch 11.8, and I think as a result of that, she's actually back to being quite strong now, definitely a better choice than Cypher. I'd argue she's a really great middle ground option sentinel, offering solid information, decent lockdown, and then little bits of chip damage thrown in too. Then her ultimate is still one of the strongest in the game. Some of the maps right now definitely are a little big, like Breeze, Corrode, and Abyss are all rough maps for her. Overall though, it does feel to me like people are just shying away from sentinels in general as a whole at the moment, and if that wasn't the case, I think Killjoy would be getting picked a lot more. With that in mind, I've got her right at the bottom of the A tier, although I do think that the 2 sentinels above her are just a little bit more suited for ranked. After that, I've got Omen, who I'm a little bit unsure about. On one hand, I do see the impact he can have as a controller making lots of solo plays with his teleports, but I just can't ignore how low his win rate is in the bottom 3 of all agents with only KO and Harbor below him. Realistically, I do think Omen is a good agent for solo queue, and that huge gap between his win rate and Clove's win rate is probably just due to the impact a first time Clove can get versus a first time Omen. Especially considering the state of those 2 agents right now, I feel like Omen's pick rate is going to continue to decline if nothing changes, and if anything, considering he's still super prominent in pro play, I wouldn't be shocked if he received more nerfs in the future. I'm still going to be putting Omen in the A tier because even though he has a poor win rate, there is a degree of mastery to his kit and playstyle. Personally, I think he's an overrated agent as a whole, but it is hard to ignore his versatility and self-sufficiency. I've actually got Skye up next, and she was one of the few agents who benefited from all the changes back in patch 11.8. I mean, almost all the initiators had their cooldowns nerfed and pretty drastically increased, but Skye has no cooldown here to speak of. I've always liked her in ranked because in an environment where you'll often only have one initiator anyway, a jack of all trades type with both flashes and recon is a pretty solid and safe pick. On top of that, a heal is always going to be good for ranked, and I think the only question mark I have over her right now is if Gekko is a better pick in that same jack of all trades role since the buff to Mosh. Regardless, I think Skye is rarely a bad pick in ranked at the moment, especially like I was saying when you're on solo initiator. Not too much else to say about this one, I'm pretty happy leaving Skye in the A tier. I've also got the only other healer right here in the A tier with Sage. Similar to Skye, she was one of the few agents that didn't get hit by the nerfs in patch 11.8. If anything, I think these changes overall are in fact a buff. I feel like people are still sleeping on Sage in general. She's got one of the highest win rates, which I'm sure some people will attribute to smurfing and boosting, but even in Radiant, she actually has the highest win rate in the game, albeit with significantly lower pick rates compared to other ranks. That makes sense to me though, especially in ranked, the healing and res are consistently able to get good value. The same is true with her slows. Unless you're just throwing them when there's literally no one there, you're going to be slowing the enemy down for a long time and there's nothing they can do about it. And then that's not even touching on her wall, which is probably her best ability. The only real downfall Sage has is the lack of passive information or flank watch, but I'd still say she's almost never a bad pick, and that's why I have her in the A tier. Now moving on, I've actually got Sova. Normally I feel like he and Fade are on a pretty similar level. Obviously they both fill that same role of a scan or recon initiator, but I think for a few reasons Sova is just a little bit worse right now. The first of those being that there is a lot less sentinel utility in the game. When there used to be Cypher trips or Vyse thorns all over the place, you could pretty consistently get value out of his shock darts and breaking those abilities, but now that there is just the one chamber trip more often than not, sure that value is still there, but just not to the same degree. The other reason I have Sova slightly worse than Fade is that he just has a little bit less information overall. His dart does have a lot more skill to it than Fade's eye, and his drone can see a lot more than Fade's dog, but Fade gets 2 charges of Prowler, and her ult can clear massive areas as well. The map pool in this matchup is also relevant too. Abyss, Breeze, and Haven are probably the only decisive Sova maps in this rotation, and with Abyss leaving and then both Fracture and Lotus returning, you're going to be seeing a lot more Fade in the short term. Still though, I wouldn't call Sova a bad pick if you already have invested a lot of time into him and you're good at him. Probably keep playing him, he's not a bad agent, I'm leaving him in the A tier. Next up is Raze, and she's been pretty neglected as of late as far as balance changes go. I say she's still a solid pick for creating space, and you're pretty reliably going to be getting in chip damage here and there with all of her abilities, if not just outright getting kills. I do still think most of the other duelists are better than Raze at the moment, which is why there's still plenty on this list above her, but if anything, I'm quite interested to see how she goes over the next few months. Firstly, again, I keep bringing up the map rotation, and if it really is Fracture and Lotus in for Abyss and Corrode, those are 2 bad Raze maps out for 2 great Raze maps in. On top of that though, I also reckon that Yoru, Neon, and Waylay could be on the chopping block for nerfs, so we could be heading back into a Raze meta pretty soon. I'm leaving her around the middle of the A tier for now, but watch this space. We've got another quick one after that with Jett, and it just feels like she's never going to be a bad agent for ranked. I mean, people are just so good at her and comfortable on her at this point. Her dash is great for both playing off angles and entering, which is immediately solid value. Add the safety of her smoke and the extra mobility in the updraft, and you've got a staple pick on your hands. She's also another agent that hasn't received any changes in quite some time. So while everyone else is getting hit with nerfs left, right, and center, it feels like Jett is slowly creeping her way back up power level wise, and again, overall, she's basically a staple of ranked at this point. I don't think she's going anywhere anytime soon, so let's leave her here in the A tier. That then leads us to Fade, who, as I mentioned, I think is a step above Sova right now, especially because she's in general just a little bit easier to pilot. I also would say that Recon in general is pretty powerful in ranked, especially compared to the other things you can get out of initiators like stuns or suppressions. I mean, taking away the enemy's aim or abilities can definitely be strong, but I don't think it gets much better than literal wall hacks showing you exactly where they are. That's why I have Sova and Fade so high up in this list, even though earlier I was talking about how bad coordination normally is in ranked. Anyway though, back to Fade. Like I was saying, the map pool already favors her a little bit now, and I think in future it's going to favor her even more. She did get a series of nerfs in patch 11.8, but almost all of those were part of the across the board changes, and then there was a surprisingly big buff to her ultimate, where the decay remains for the entire duration. I almost wanted to put Fade in S tier, but that just didn't sound right, although I do think she's a fair bit better than Sova for ranked right now. Especially in a scenario where you already have flashes on your team, thanks to maybe a Phoenix or Yoru, then I would definitely be taking Fade instead of a Gekko or a Skye. So that wraps up my A tier of agents. None of these guys require a crazy amount of coordination to get the most out of their utility, and then the duelists and Omen have a great degree of agency in their ability to make solo plays. Now moving up into the S tier of agents who I think are super strong right now, and the first of those is going to be Chamber. He's the lowest on the S tier for me because he does have a pretty big caveat that if you can't aim, you probably shouldn't play him. I mean, if you're only playing this guy with 2 abilities, you're obviously going to be better off on basically any other sentinel. After some of those better options like Vyse and Cypher got gutted last year though, Chamber has risen up in terms of popularity. He's just a super easy pick because you fill the sentinel role for your team and put a reliable trip on the flank, and then after that, you just get to go off and do your own thing, focusing on winning your own gunfights. On top of that, his TP is of course just a super strong ability for taking unexpected angles really aggressively. Again, I wouldn't be playing Chamber if you don't have faith in your aim, but otherwise I love him in ranked as a pretty simple agent to just turn your brain off and focus on shooting, and I mean that's always going to be good in ranked. After that, I've got Yoru. By now everyone is aware of just how strong he is. The only downside he has is how hard he is to play compared to the average agent. I'd almost put him in a similar vein as an agent like Astra, who is almost too hard for ranked, especially for the average player, but I think the extra agency he has as a duelist with flashes makes him super strong in ranked. You can practically be on both sides at once as a defender with his teleports, and his kit overall makes him a decent pseudo initiator. I'm still a little confused by some of the changes in patch 11.8, particularly towards his ultimate, because this feels like it pushes him even more into the scouting or utility direction for pro play, mostly nerfing his solo capabilities. Even with those changes though, I still think he's worth playing if you're already good at him. If you don't already play Yoru, I think you're better off just hopping on something like Phoenix instead, because there isn't as much of a learning curve and you're going to get more value faster. It is also worth pointing out that Yoru does have one of the worst win rates in the game, but again, I think that's mostly due to just how hard he is to learn. The best Yoru players though, who have invested a lot of time into him, do a pretty good job of proving just how high the ceiling on this agent is, and I still think he is well deserving of an S tier spot. Breaking into the top 3 now, and the next agent I've got on this list is going to be Neon. If you're playing Neon, you are playing a completely different game to everyone else. She's honestly a shadow of her former self when the slide used to be fully accurate, but it's also been a long time since those nerfs for her. In fact, that was all the way back in December of 2024, and since then she's slowly becoming more and more popular again. Once you get the movement down, you just become the lobby admin, especially on rounds with your ultimate, and especially because she's also getting a lot of playtime in the pro scene right now, it wouldn't shock me if more nerfs were coming her way. But yeah, in her current state, Neon is definitely an S tier agent for me right now. People get really frustrated playing against her, it's super easy to just run it down, tilt them by W keying, and yeah, I think most people will find it hard to argue with how strong Neon is. The best duelist for ranked though, as far as I'm concerned, is actually going to be Phoenix. He's just so self-sufficient, which I think is going to be really important again in that messy solo queue environment that we're talking about here. He can seriously do a little bit of everything, whether he needs an angle blocked off with his wall, clear out corners with his molly, entry with flashes, all while he can easily heal himself back up. Then his ultimate isn't groundbreaking in terms of raw power, but when you factor in the relative cost, 6 orbs for this is crazy. If you pick up an ult orb, get 1 kill and die, you're already halfway to your ultimate, and that's just in a pretty ordinary round. Also, I sort of alluded to this earlier in Yoru's section, but Phoenix isn't anywhere near as hard to play, which I think gives him some value here and puts him a step ahead for ranked for the average player. Sure, there is a degree of mastery with his flashes and maybe knowing the exact distance for his molly and stuff, but it's really not that complicated and there is still a lot you can do with him. So with all that being said, I am pretty happy leaving Phoenix here at the top of the S tier on this list. Last but not least though, you already know who's going to land the top spot, and that is going to be Clove. This agent completely upended the controller class when they were added, and it has not recovered since. Both the win rate and pick rate here are just astronomically high, but it's not that surprising when you think about it. Clove has the perfect kit for ranked. You've essentially got smokes on a duelist who can have 2 lives and still use those smokes after they're dead. People will always bring up that those smokes are very limited in both range and duration, but I really don't think that matters because smoking after dying is just so strong. The recent nerfs we saw were not even close to enough to stop Clove from dominating ranked, and I think this agent will always be in basically every single lobby unless they're either nerfed into oblivion or reworked entirely. Anyway, this is my overall tier list. Self-sufficient agents and especially duelists are going to be strong since you can take over the game. Meanwhile, more complex agents that rely on your teammates and coordination are simply going to struggle in comparison.